أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا محمد الهادي الأمين وعلى آله وجنده الطيبين الطاهرين. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us recognize the truth and help us follow it, and to help us recognize the falsehood and help us avoid it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the best of our deeds, the last ones that we do, and the best of our days, the day that we shall meet Him. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, by the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, today we'll start a new series. The topic of which is always interesting. SubhanAllah, I know even kids growing up, this used to be, the most interesting topic. It is someone whose love is an act of worship. Because the more you love him, the better you become. The closer you get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course the topic is the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. So this inshallah will start the series on the life of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. And loving the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, like I said, is an act of worship. It only brings a person close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the ways of achieving that is by studying his biography. Studying the biography of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. And subhanAllah, it becomes, and then you see that when you study the life of the Prophet, it becomes easy to love him, alayhi salatu wasalam. And this is a sign of the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. As in the hadith, that إن الله إذا أحب عبد إذا الله إذا أحب عبدا نادى جبريل أني أحب عبدي فلان فأحبه. That when Allah loves one of His servants, Allah will call upon Jibreel and He will tell him, I love my servant so and so, so do love him yourself. And Jibreel would love him. And Jibreel will call the angels and the angels would love him. And the angels will call on this earth and everybody would love him. So loving the Prophet ﷺ is an indication, is a great sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the Prophet ﷺ. But studying the life of the Prophet ﷺ, of course, I think should be approached with the proper perspective. We don't want to study it as a story, as a fable, as something that is really interesting, but I think the Prophet ﷺ was far beyond that. Sometimes you study the life of a person, you read a book, a biography of a person, to understand or to enjoy some of their qualities, their insight, their genius sometimes. But the Prophet ﷺ is not a genius. He was not a genius. He was a messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala above everybody else. So as much as this element is there, when you study the life of the Prophet ﷺ, all of these will be achieved. You enjoy actually the great personality, the great genius, and all of the other traits. But the Prophet ﷺ was way beyond that. And I think the proper attitude, or one of the benefits of studying the Prophet ﷺ's life, is to know how to implement the Quran. Because as his wife described him, that he was a walking Quran, or his character was the Quran. كَانَ خُلُقَهُ الْقُرْآنِ. He was the embodiment of the Quran. So if you want to study, if you want to know how to implement the Quran in your daily life, then the best way or the best path to that is to study the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. But unfortunately, sometimes we reduce him ﷺ into some praises. We praise the Prophet ﷺ, or into an occasion. And all of these things, praising the Prophet, of course, is a great thing. But it's like somebody who's saying that studying the Quran means knowing or learning how to recite it. Now, learning how to recite the Quran is, of course, is of essence, especially if we don't have anyone that meets that requirement. But the Quran actually is beyond that, is more than that. And the same thing with the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Just like a person who has a medicine in front of him, he can repeat the name of the medicine many times. Medicine, or give it a specific name. He won't benefit from it unless he actually takes that medicine and then benefits from it directly. The same thing, we can praise the Prophet ﷺ, which is great. I'm not dismissing that. We can praise the Prophet ﷺ, we can adore him, we can do all of that. But unless we live his life actually in our life, our own life, we won't benefit much from studying his biography. That's why one of the benefits actually of studying the life of the Prophet is to be in contact or to be exposed to the Islamic reality, the way it was revealed, not just as an academic reality, but as a real aspect, as a real reality, something that comes actually into our daily life. That's why benefiting or studying the life of the Prophet ﷺ is all of that. And I think it will be the most unfair and the biggest disservice to reduce a reality into a legend. The Prophet was not a myth or a legend, and sometimes we study his life as if he was like that. I don't think we will be doing justice to the life of the Prophet by doing that. I was once giving a program, one of the TV program, And I was talking about the Prophet ﷺ and even some aspects of his relationship with his wife. Because it was, of course, a guidance to us. And one of the callers objected to that, that how dare you say that about the Prophet ﷺ. Well, we say these things about the Prophet because that's really what his guidance was meant to. The Prophet was not like a sacred image that we put above, we don't even touch it. The Prophet was meant to be actually a source of guidance. That's why it will be the biggest disservice to reduce such a great reality, such a great person, into a legend or something of a myth nature. The Prophet ﷺ's life was much more touching to our own life than just that. So we study the life of the Prophet ﷺ for that. What are some of the other reasons we study the life of the Prophet ﷺ? So what?
So people don't celebrate his birthday just as a occasion.
Well, I said that we don't want to reduce him into an occasion, and there are different opinions whether it should be done or not. We're not going to get into that. But I think the Prophet, is, like somebody, for example, who only talks to his mother, for example, on Mother's Day. Yeah, subhanAllah, I think she took care of you every day, not just on your birthday when you were a kid. To reduce her into a Mother's Day. The same thing when a person reduces the Prophet into a certain occasion, alayhi salatu wassalam. So we study his life with the proper attitude. What are some of the benefits of studying his life, alayhi salatu wassalam? I'm sorry, Samir?
Emulate his life.
To emulate his life, to follow his, what? Yes, the Quran is a condensed book of guidance, and sometimes it is brief, it does not give you the specifics. How do you bring that Quran into practice? It's the life of the Prophet ﷺ. That's why the life of the Prophet is the implementation or the putting into practice of the Quran. He's the best one that implemented the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised him in that regard. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ. You have the greatest example in the Prophet for anyone who's seeking Allah in the last day. If your goal is something else, then the Prophet may not be your example. But if your goal is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to attain success in this life and in the next, then the Prophet ﷺ is the best example for you to follow. So we study his life to know how we can implement actually the Quran. That's one of them. You had something, Muhammad?
So like as far as being a model or example of a husband,
Yes,
father,
yes.
leader.
Jazakallah khair. And the Prophet ﷺ is the only person that attained perfection in the human context, perfection in all spheres, in all aspects. He was the perfect husband, the perfect father, the perfect brother, the perfect son, the perfect in any way, alayhi salatu wasalam. And above all of that, he was the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here's your example, in all ways. Yes, Radwan.
I think there was a Muslim individual who said that if the Prophet was here, that he would solve all the world's problems over a cup of tea.
Yeah, that's Lamartine.
That it's important, not put him in the Arabian Peninsula of the past, but applying his life to the modern time.
Jazakallah khair, subhanAllah, even the people that don't follow him, they actually acknowledge his great qualities. Of course, the 100 most influential people, he wasn't a Muslim, heart, and he put the Prophet at the top. And the example that you mentioned, that I think it was, what's his name, Hemingway, I think it was Hemingway, that says the Prophet could have solved actually all the problems of humanity by drinking or while drinking a cup of coffee. What else do we study the Prophet ﷺ's life? We study his life to understand the Quran, by the way. Because there are, of course, the surahs of the Quran, some of them are directly connected to events that he witnessed ﷺ. So if you want to understand, for example, Surah Al-Anfal, you have to study the Battle of Badr. If you want to understand the Surah Ali Imran, especially the last third, you have to study the Battle of Uhud. If you want to understand Surah Al-Ahzab, you have to study which battle? Al-Khandaq or Al-Ahzab. And if you want to understand the beginning of Surah An-Nur, you have to study the false accusation of Aisha alayhi radwanillah. That's why certain events are directly connected to the Quran, and to understand the Quran, you must study the life of the Prophet ﷺ, because they are directly connected, the cause of the revelation. Another reason why we study the life of the Prophet ﷺ, which I mentioned earlier, is to learn how to love him ﷺ. When you study his life, it becomes easy to love him. It becomes natural to love him alayhi salatu wasalam. His character, his qualities, his sacrifices. It becomes just natural for you to love the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And by the way, you rarely see any Muslim who doesn't love the Prophet, if at all, a Muslim that does not love the Prophet. Even if a person is not practicing actually, but loving the Prophet is always actually part of who we are as Muslims. Even if a person is not really practicing. That's why nobody would accept the fact that the Prophet ﷺ would be insulted. So we love the Prophet ﷺ because it is part of our iman, by the way. Once the Prophet ﷺ was walking with Umar ﷺ, and as they were walking side by side, the Prophet grabbed the hand of Umar and he pressed on it. SubhanAllah, a gesture of tenderness. You can imagine. So Umar naturally, he says, Ya Rasulullah, Wallahi, I love you more than anything except myself. I love you more than my money, my wealth, my family, except myself. Look, he was honest. So when he says except myself, it means the other claims were correct. It means he did love him more than he loved his family and his wealth and all of the others. And the Prophet ﷺ told him, Ya Umar, Wallahi, your iman will not be complete until you love me more even than yourself. Then Umar thought for a second and he says, Ya Rasulullah, Wallahi, I love you more than myself. Of course it didn't just happen to him, but the Prophet knew how to bring up the best in the people, how to bring it back to the surface. That's what the Prophet did. But loving the Prophet ﷺ is part of our iman. It's part of our very iman. And of course, the benefit of loving the Prophet, first, it becomes easier to follow his example. Right? When you love someone, you talk like them, you act like them, it becomes easy. That's why Abdullah ibn Umar alayhi he took it even far. That once, because he loved the Prophet so much, of course all the Sahaba did. He was once walking, riding his horse in a place, and he made a turn with the horse. They told him, why did you do that? He said, the Prophet, when he passed through this place, he made a turn. Of course, Abdullah ibn Umar was a scholar among the Sahaba. He knew that this is not something that we are required to do. But he just did it out of the love of the Prophet ﷺ. Once he was walking and he loosened his shirt. Why did you do it? Well, when the Prophet was here, he loosened his shirt. Again, when you love someone, then you start acting like them. You start, following their path. It becomes easier to follow the path of the Prophet ﷺ, to implement his sunnah if you love him. There's also a great benefit out of the loving the Prophet ﷺ. What is it? What? Well, that could be true. Actually, the way to get the love of Allah is by following the path of the Prophet. The verse in Ali Imran, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهِ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمْ اللَّهِ. Allah saying to the Prophet that, tell the people, if you love Allah, then follow me. Means follow the Prophet, Allah would love you back. But there's a benefit out of loving the Prophet ﷺ, a great benefit. What is it? You'll be with him on the day of judgment. The shafa'ah is for his ummah, and of course specifically you'll be with him. Because the Prophet promised that. Once I think his servant, his name is Thawban. Shortly before the death of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet looked at him and he was pale. Like something bad happened to him. The Prophet told him, what happened to you? And he told him, Ya Rasulullah, Wallahi, I love you so much. And I'm so afraid that when we die, I may end up in hellfire, or end up in Al-Jannah in the lower place, and I won't get to see you. See, that's his concern. He won't get to see the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet told him that, he gave him the good news that the person will be with those that he loves. So this is a great news that the Prophet gave to his Sahaba ﷺ, and to all of us. To all of us, that we can earn a place next to him by loving him. Because if you think about it, who's going to be next to the Prophet? There'll be Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Hamza, Safiya, Sumayya, Aisha, Khadija. How can you earn a place next among these people? You cannot. There's nothing that you can do to earn a place among these people except one way, by loving the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet promised him and promised us that the person will be with those that he loves. So if you love the Prophet, inshallah you'll be with him. Inshallah you'll be with him. That's why, by the way, here this can be a double-edged sword. You want to make sure you don't give your heart to anybody. You want to make sure that you love the correct people. You want to make sure that you get close to the right people. So that's why one of the benefits actually of loving the Prophet, of studying the Prophet's biography, is to love him ﷺ, and to have his shafa'ah and his company on the day of judgment. What else? Yes?
To separate his sunnah
Okay?
Some of the see sunnah as applies to him, some do not apply to us. And also to separate his personality as human being from the wahy, so that, by understanding his biography,
Yes.
also to understand.
Yeah, these are some of the things that we'll be going over actually, as to how he was and the value of the revelation and all of these things. So again, studying the life of the Prophet ﷺ helps us implement the Quran, helps us learn how to implement the Quran, because the Quran into practice is the Sunnah of the Prophet, is the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. Another benefit is, we just discussed it. Come on, what? To understand the Quran, to love him ﷺ, and to learn actually the whole Islamic model, how the whole thing actually was put into practice. Okay? Yarhamukumullah. Now, of course, when you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, like I said, he would be the example or the ultimate example in any way. And he was the one person that was not spoiled by power. That's why he was the same in the beginning and he was the same at the end. He did not change ﷺ. Not suddenly, one of us, mashallah, the moment we get into a good position, we become very difficult to approach. The Prophet was just one of his companions ﷺ. He was one of them. They were his brothers. That's why there was no difference between them. So the Prophet ﷺ was all of that. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us his company, inshallah, on the day of judgment. Now, when you're talking about the biography of the Prophet ﷺ, when was that documented? What we call the seerah. The seerah of the Prophet. That's the word. By the way, the word seerah means biography. Anyone's biography is called his seerah. But normally when people, commonly use the word the seerah or as-seerah, it refers to the biography of the Prophet specifically, alayhi salatu wasalam. When was the seerah documented? When was it written?
Ibn Ishaq was the first one?
No, he was not the first one. Ibn Ishaq was the second, actually, generation.
Ibn Hisham?
Ibn Hisham came after Ibn Ishaq. Before that, there was Urwa ibn Zubayr, who died in the year 92 after the Hijrah. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, by the way, during his lifetime, he gave clear instructions to the Sahaba not to write anything that they hear from him except the Quran. That's why he told them very clearly that do not write anything from me, you hear from me, except the Quran. And if you have written anything, then do erase it. And because of two reasons. One of the concerns is that the Prophet was concerned that people might mix the Quran with his own sayings. That's why when that concern is not there, he did permit some of the Sahaba to write some things. Like for example, Ali ibn Abi Talib brought a few parts, and Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, they had few things with the knowledge of the Prophet, and the Prophet did not object. But in general, the Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba not to write anything except the Quran. The other reason is that the people that could read and write in Medina were very few. That's why, imagine if they're going to write everything the Prophet did and said, ﷺ, this will take so much away from the effort that should be put in writing the Quran. So the Prophet wanted to put all the effort actually in writing the Quran. That's why, which was all written during his life, ﷺ. The Quran was written completely during the life of the Prophet, ﷺ. That's why after his death, the concern of mixing the Quran with the hadith, the Quran with the sayings of the Prophet, was not there anymore. That's why the Sahaba actually started the process of writing down what the Prophet said, ﷺ. Especially with the fear that some of his guidance would be lost. Some of the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ would be lost. That's why the need started actually for writing the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ. So the first thing that was written was the Quran. After that was the hadith or the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? And the writing of the seerah of the Prophet, the biography as a biography, started after that. Started actually at a later time, like I said, first with the generation of Urwa ibn Zubayr, who died in the year 92 after the migration. So what was written first was again, what? The Quran during the life of the Prophet, and then the hadith or the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ, the sunnah, and after that the biography of the Prophet as a complete biography. It started with Urwa ibn Zubayr in the year 92 after the migration. But the writings of Urwa ibn Zubayr were not preserved. Of his, actually, and that same generation were not preserved. Some believe that some parts of that were found actually in the history of At-Tabari. Until the next generation came, which is that of Muhammad ibn Ishaq. Muhammad ibn Ishaq, who died in the year 152 after the migration. But even the writing of Muhammad ibn Ishaq were not preserved. He wrote a book called Al-Aziz, which was not preserved, that his student that came after him, which is Ibn Hisham. Ibn Hisham actually took the seerah of Muhammad ibn Ishaq, he purified it, he organized it, and he presented to us as what is known today as the seerah of Ibn Hisham. So the seerah of Ibn Hisham is the first documented biography of the Prophet ﷺ as such. Yes?
But then why do we have two distinct books, Seerah ibn Ishaq and Seerah ibn Hisham?
Wallahi, I'm not really sure. The seerah of Ibn Ishaq, the seerah of Muhammad ibn Ishaq actually was reflected in the seerah of Ibn Hisham. So the seerah of Ibn Hisham is the first, record of Muhammad ibn Ishaq. So the book of Muhammad ibn Ishaq was not preserved. So I would have to look exactly actually what that book actually says, the whole title. Because that's really what is reflected to. Now, when you're talking about the Sunnah being written and documented, and the Seerah was written also and documented, there was a process for which that was done. And subhanAllah, if you look, you won't find anyone's biography who was documented with so much detail as that of the Prophet ﷺ. Sometimes we may learn about the Prophet more than we know about ourselves. If I were to ask, for example, any of you, how many white hair do you have in your beard? Or in your hair? Oh, I don't know. But we know how many hairs actually the Prophet had. How many white hairs? The Sahaba counted that. So it is so much detail, subhanAllah, that the Prophet did this. The Prophet, for example's face changed. The Prophet took this step. The Sahaba were watching every single move that the Prophet ﷺ did, because they understood who was among them. Allah says in Surah Al-Hujurat, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ فِيكُمْ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ, that know that among you is the messenger of Allah. This is a great reality. That among you is not anybody. If you have a good delegate, we have the mayor visiting our masjid. Oh, we feel good. We have the Congress, we have something like, we feel good. Now here Allah is saying that among you is the very messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Sahaba understood what that means. That's why they watched every single move that the Prophet ﷺ had. That's why all of that was documented. All of that was documented. Now, but when they documented that, of course, they followed a certain process. Because people can write anything, right? People can write anything. And there could be some mistakes. That's why they followed a scientific method, by the way, that does not exist with anyone except in this ummah. Which is the process of Mustalah al-Hadith. Mustalah al-Hadith. The way of purifying or studying or establishing the authenticity of any text. For any text to be authentic, because people will say the Prophet did this. The Prophet did that. Well, how do I know this is correct? Right? There has to be some process of establishing the credibility of that narration, of that text. That's why this ummah, like I said, had this quality that nobody else actually had. You will not find it in any other ummah where you can actually verify the information. That's why there are some specific requirements for any story to be credible. Anybody knows any of them? Jazakallah khair. The chain of narration is part of the whole documentation. So when they say, for example, this is a hadith. For example, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. One of you will not complete his iman until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. Okay? Now the hadith does not only include that, but it includes also the chain as to how we got this text. For example, عن عقبة عن ابن نافع عن ابن عمر عن الرسول عليه الصلاة والسلام. This is the golden chain. That so-and-so narrated on so-and-so, on so-and-so, that he heard the Prophet saying that. So both parts make up the hadith, make up the narration. And the scholars that study the credibility of a text, they look at both. They look at the chain. So among the conditions, that every narrator in the chain has to be trustworthy. So if a person is known to be a liar, that's it, he's discredited. And some they said that even if he lied once in his lifetime, he's discredited. Some of them are very strict. This is what's called ilm al-jarh wa ta'deel. They study first of all, the trustworthiness of the person. The second thing, they study the ability of that person to transmit the information accurately. Because a person may have the sincerest of intentions. He was the honest person, the most honest person. But however, he has memory problems. Now that discredits him. You're discrediting his ability, not him as a person. The other requirement is that the chain has to be continuous. So let's say, for example, we have person A narrated on behalf of person B. And when we study their biography, we find out that, well, A died before B was born. So how could he narrate from him? So there's a missing thing. Or that person A, for example, lived all of his life in California. Person B lived all of his life in London, for example. Well, how could he have narrated from him? That's why it has to be likely that they have met. And they of course, they study also the text itself, that it has to be clear of what's called the shudud wal-illa. No odd text or nothing that flaws the text itself, which is a big field as well. So the scholars actually of hadith, the scholars that documented the hadith, what they did, they took all of this into consideration and they documented the hadith. The scholars of the seerah that documented the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, they followed the same process. This process of mustalah ilm al-hadith. They follow the same process of screening any text to establish its credibility. However, the scholars of hadith were a lot stricter. So you have, starting of course with the earlier documentation like Imam Malik and his Muwatta, actually after that reaching, an immeasurable height, with the next generation of Yahya ibn Ma'in and Ahmad ibn Hanbal, until it reached its peak with the next generation, which is that of al-Bukhari and his student Imam Muslim. Until we ended up with the greatest product, which is a seerah, or a sunnah actually, that is established to be authentic. Now again, the scholars of seerah were not as strict in accepting the narrations as the scholars of hadith, because they are looking at it as a biography, versus the scholars of sunnah, of hadith, which were actually concerned with the documentation as a source of guidance. That's why they were a little stricter. They were a little stricter, the scholars of hadith, than the scholars of seerah. But you do have some efforts that came afterward of some scholars that rewrote actually the seerah. One of them, of course, is Ibn Qayyim and his great book Zad al-Ma'ad. Okay? And with that, we ended up with the life of the Prophet ﷺ documented. Of course, there are so many books about the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and subhanAllah, each one of them adds something new. Each one of them. So you cannot say, for example, alhamdulillah, I studied the seerah, I read one book. Well, there are so many, you know how many books are written about the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Of course, the one that is really common is the book by Al-Mubarak Furi, Al-Rahiq Al-Makhtoum, The Sealed Nectar, who was a great scholar. It's a small book, it's a really good book if anybody wants to have an overview of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, and it has been translated into English. There's another, of course, Sirat ibn Hisham is another one. There's another one actually that is a really great one, especially if you're looking to focus on the lessons of the seerah. It's called Fiqh al-Seerah. And the book is written by al-Buti. It's called, I think, The Jurisprudence of the Prophet's Biography. And this is also translated into English. There's another great book by the same name, by another great scholar, Muhammad al-Ghazali, also called Fiqh al-Seerah. There are also some books, and those are also translated. All of these are translated. There are also some books that have not been translated for anyone who is interested. There's 2 volumes by Munir al-Ghadban called Al-Manhaj al-Haraki, L-Seerah al-Nabawiyya, the movement aspect of the seerah of the Prophet. And he has another 3 volumes, Al-Manhaj al-Tarbawi, the tarbiyah aspect of, or the tarbiyah manhaj or curriculum of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. But any of these books will be good. If I were to suggest one, I would suggest the book by Al-Buti. Because most of us are familiar with some of the events, and I think this takes it one step further into focusing actually on the lessons. So what he does, he briefly describes every single event, and we'll be doing, inshallah, something similar to that. So we'll be actually following that book largely. And after that, he derives the lessons. He focuses on some of the lessons that are actually derived from that story. That's why, inshallah, in this series, we won't just focus on the story element, even though that's an enjoying, subhanAllah, it's a good aspect of it. And sometimes we have to spend some time with the story itself, but we'll try to focus, inshallah, as well on some practical aspects of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? Any question before we start? We continue, inshallah. It's called I think anybody knows it. I think it's called The Jurisprudence of the Prophet's Biography by Al-Buti, by Sheikh Al-Buti. He's still alive. Yes, Muhammad.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could go over. There was an incident of a companion traveling to collect a hadith from someone, and he observed this person
Yeah.
food, pretend.
A camel. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the story was mentioned about al-Bukhari, by the way, that he was collecting actually, and what they used to do, this gets into the process of collecting the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. They used to go from one person to another, trying, if they hear, for example, that person has a hadith. Now, alhamdulillah, we have everything documented. All you have to do is just go through the book. But until that book actually came into existence, there was so much effort, a tremendous effort, that I think it was said about al-Bukhari that he went to a person that he heard has a hadith. He traveled to that person, and that person had a camel that has gone far, and he was trying to get the camel back. So what he did, he gathered, his clothes, it's like trying to fool the camel that I have some grass in here. And there was nothing in his dress. There was nothing in here. But he was doing that for the camel to come. And the scholar, they said, well, this person is a liar. Even if he's lying on behalf of an animal, then what guarantees that he will not lie in other instances? That's why they were very strict when it comes to establishing the credibility of the scholars. And some of them actually were almost like too strict. One of them is Yahya ibn Ma'in, alayhi radwanillah. He was known for his strictness. He was specialized in that area of ilm al-rijal, or what is called ilm al-jarh wa ta'dil, that discrediting and then establishing the credibility of the narrators. And that's, by the way, the process they will do. They will first discredit the person, and they will establish their credibility. And they were not concerned about no, this is backbiting, this is haram. Like they ask a person, I think Yahya ibn Ma'in, they asked him that you're saying that this person is not trustworthy. Aren't you concerned that this person will be facing you on the day of judgment? And he said, it is better for me to face him than to face the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because they're not doing it out of their own, whims and desires. They're doing it as a tool to establish or to purify the guidance of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So they were very strict in that regard. And of course, the most balanced one is al-Bukhari alayhi radwanillah. Okay? Any question before we continue, inshallah?
Will you repeat the names of the books you said?
It's called The Jurisprudence of the Prophet's Biography by al-Buti. Yeah, al-Buti. It is available. I think Jarir Bookstore has it. Okay? Fiqh al-Sira in Arabic. If anyone actually, if you can read Arabic, I would recommend getting the actual Arabic book. Yes?
Yeah, can you tell us something about
About what?
Sahih Sitta?
Wallahi, we don't want to get into actually ilm al-hadith. This is going to get actually into the sihah and all of these things. This is going to get into a different area. With your permission, inshallah, we'll talk about it at some other time. And the purpose I was trying actually to explain to you where the seerah falls, in regard or with regard to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. That how the seerah was documented. This is an important area, but I don't want to get into that, inshallah.
So, trying to compare the seerah versus the hadith, I can understand that when they were documenting the hadith, they had to go through a lot of research.
See, the same...
Hadith is just like a set of statements.
Yes.
Right? So it's easy to investigate.
Yes.
Look at it.
Yes.
But how can you investigate like a seerah?
Well, the seerah, they did not have the seerah as a whole thing. The seerah came as a synthesis of pieces, right? I mean, that's how they would have it. So they would examine the pieces and follow the same process.
Like they would examine ahzab?
Yes, of course. They will do that. That's why if you look, by the way, the first documentation of seerah as pieces was the Quran itself, right? The Quran describes some of the events that happened to the Prophet ﷺ. The second one was the Sunnah, and after that the seerah, as a complete thing. But the scholars of the seerah, they follow the same process, but they were not as strict and as demanding in accepting any narration as the scholars of Sunnah were. But the same process was followed. Okay?
So the seerah addresses his birth to the time of revelation?
Yes. The seerah actually covers all of, the scholars of seerah, they cover everything about his life, alayhi salatu wasalam, as a complete biography. That's what it is. It's a biography. It's just, a recount of his life, alayhi salatu wasalam.
Going back to this question, I think to understand the seerah, to me it's very important to understand what was happening in that period.
Yes. And we'll start, inshallah, before the birth of the Prophet. If we have the time, we'll start today, inshallah. Yes, Ridwan.
I think that the point that you brought up about being stringent in terms of the sunnah, being less stringent I'm just thinking about, and non-Muslims might say, well, maybe the seerah and it may not be, authentic. How can you take from that?
Yes.
So on and so forth. What would your response be to that?
Wallah khair, I think it is really important not for us to feel apologetic. One thing that is certain though, is that the seerah is far more authentic than any other book that any other religion has. If you look, for example, as to what people consider today to be the Bible. The Bible today is not the equivalent of the Quran. So you cannot say, for example, the Bible that we have today is the words of Isa alayhi salam or the words of Allah subhanahu. No, it is not. The Bible that you have is more like the seerah. More something like the seerah. It has like stories about Isa alayhi salam or some of his sayings. But the difference between our seerah and their seerah, which is the Bible, is that we had this process of screening and establishing. They did not have that. The process in what we have, you can actually trace all of the information back to its source. You have this sanad. We are the ummah of the sanad, as we are referred to sometimes. You have this sanad where you can verify the information, so and so from the Prophet. You do not have that with anybody. You cannot have this continuous chain of going back to the source. So even in that regard, the seerah is far more credible than any other actually book written by anybody else. So yes, the seerah actually is what it's called dhanniya. Even the ahad are called dhanniya. In a way, they may not be conclusive, but however, it is the most credible text that any human actually has, next to the Quran, of course. Next to the Quran. So you have this scientific method, we have it. We have the scientific method that was not actually followed by anybody else. You cannot. Well, let me see if anybody else had, and I'll come back to you if nobody else. I think I saw a hand in the back. Okay, back to you.
So I think to add to what you said, that there is no historian alive who can dispute the events of Isa.
Yes.
There is no historian who can say, oh, Badr never happened.
Yes.
Or Ahzab never happened.
No, but you cannot say because there is no one to discredit that, means that it's true. No, but the scholars did that work for us. You know what al-Bukhari did? He went from his time all the way to the Prophet ﷺ. So that's why we have the product of al-Bukhari. Or the product of Ibn Hanbal, for example. We have these products. And these products go from the author, which is Ibn Hanbal or al-Bukhari or Muslim or al-Nasa'i or Ibn Dawud or all of the other, Abu Dawud or all the others, going back all the way to the Prophet ﷺ. You had that chain. You had that materials already there. We have it already. It was already established. And of course the final product was actually written. It was not just passed on by word, but it was actually written. And we have it today. We have it today. Okay? Now, back to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. When do we stop? 5:50? 50 past? Okay, khair inshallah. Now when you're looking, I think, at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, it is good to look at some of the event that surrounded his birth ﷺ, and the situation specifically of Arabia. Maybe a glimpse at that. We're not going to spend too much time on that. We'll focus inshallah more on the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And one thing that you'll see striking is the tremendous change that this religion actually took the Arabs from, as to where they were, and within such a short period of time how they changed and they became the leaders actually of the whole world. That no change actually was as fast in history, and also as long lasting as that particular change. So it wasn't just something going up and then suddenly actually going down, but it lasted actually all the way up till today. But no change had happened so quickly. So we'll go back inshallah and look at Yemen. That's anyone from Yemen in here? MashaAllah. Yemen, of course, was the origin of all the Arabs. That's where the Arabs originated, actually, from Yemen. And then when the dam of Sad Ma'rib actually was destroyed, that's when they started spreading. And it happened, of course, at the time of Ibrahim, when he put his son Ismail in there, and the tribe of Jurhum, of course, left in there. We're not going to start, by the way, from Ibrahim alayhi salam. I'm just giving a brief, note in there. And then that's where it started. So the focus or the center or the source of the Arabs, of course, was in Yemen. And they had, in Yemen, around that time, a little before the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, they had several great kings. One of them, his name is Tabban As'ad, or Tubba. And he's the one that introduced actually Judaism into Yemen. Before that, they used to worship, fire and different things, until he introduced actually Judaism into Yemen. And he died. And after that, he had, several children who succeeded into leading, until one of his children, his name is Dhu Nuwas, a famous name, Dhu Nuwas. And Dhu Nuwas, of course, he was preaching Judaism, along with some of the deviant beliefs, the deviant practices that he has. So what Dhu Nuwas had, he was grooming, some young men to become magicians. One of them in particular, who will be the hero of our story today, and this is the story of the boy and the king. So he had this young man actually being trained by some master magician, apprentice, sorcerer, whatever, on some hill. And then he will go to get some lessons from him, and then he will go down. But on his way, there was a Christian monk that was stationed in there at the bottom of the hill. So on his way to the master magician, he will stop by that monk. He will stop, he will visit with him, until gradually he liked his religion. He liked that religion of Christianity. It was still in its pure form. It was still, in the way that Isa alayhi salam brought it down. So eventually, he stopped going to the magician. And then the magician, of course, he complained to the king, Dhu Nuwas, that, hey, watch out, this boy is cooking something. He's not coming to me anymore. And he found out what was going on, and he found out that there was a monk that he was visiting. So that Dhu Nuwas, the king, went and he killed that monk. And of course he wouldn't change. And he threatened to kill that young man, and that young man would not change. So he tried actually to kill that young man, and no matter what he tries, he would fail. They would try to throw him off the top of a cliff, then some earthquake will happen, everybody falls down except that young man. They will take him to the ocean, to the sea, to throw him off the boat capsizes, and everybody falls and drowns except that young man. So the king gave up, and everybody was talking about this young man that the king is failing to kill. So the young man told him, I know the way, if you want to kill me. You grab my arrow, and you say, Bismillah, in the name of Allah, the Lord of this young man, and you hit me with it, in front of everybody. That's the only way it will succeed. And the king was so desperate that that's exactly what he did. He gathered everybody, Bismillah, Rabba hadha al-ghulam, in the name of Allah, the Lord of this young man, and he hit him, and the young man died. And on the spot, 20,000 people become Muslim, become Christian, as Isa delivered alayhi salatu wassalam. 20,000. Now, of course, one question here, did it just happen to them? Of course, that means there was some effort of a da'wah, apparently, just suddenly. Of course, at least there was a notion of a certain religion. Otherwise, how would they change suddenly? So 20,000 on the spot became believers, which of course infuriated the king beyond any measure. He had one, now he had 20,000. So he threatened to kill them one after the other, and they would not change. Until, of course, he decided to dig a big trench of fire and to throw him in one after the other. And of course, this is mentioned in which surah? Surah Al-Buruj. وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْبُرُوجِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْمَوْعُودِ وَشَاهِدٍ وَمَشْهُودٍ قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ. Allah is talking about them. Allah mentioned that story in the Quran. So 20,000 people throwing them in one after the other. And again, like I said, none of them would give. One person was spared of the 20,000. His name is Daus Dhu Tha'laban. Daus Dhu Tha'laban was the only one that was spared out of 20,000. So what he did, he ran away and then off toward the Caesar of Rome, the Caesar of the Romans, who was Christian, because the people that were killed were Christians. So he went to him anyway, trying to get his support. Look what that king actually did to us. He killed 20,000 of us because we are Christians like yourself. The Caesar didn't care. He's just a political leader. He doesn't care about any of that. But he referred him to the king of Abyssinia, Najashi. By the way, Najashi was not his name. Najashi is his title. Like you say, for example, the Caesar. It's not his name, it's his title. So the king of Abyssinia was called the Najashi. This is different than the Najashi of the Prophet ﷺ, who was named Ashama. So this Najashi, of course, was a devout Christian. And he would not accept the fact that 20,000 of Christians would die in such a way, so he prepared an army of 70,000. 70,000 warriors off toward Yemen to remove that tyrant king and establish a Christian ruling. And the army was led by a person named Aryat. And one of the commanders of the army was Abraha. Anybody heard the name Abraha? Abraha, of course, the story of the elephant, Abraha al-Ashram. And of course, very easily, they were able to take over all of Yemen. And now Yemen was under the ruling of the Abyssinians, the Christian Abyssinians at that time. And then eventually, a fight erupted between Aryat and Abraha. And a big division was about to happen in the army. So Abraha suggested something to Aryat. He said to him that, hey, listen, instead of us dragging the whole army and the whole people into our own personal fight, why don't we have a duel? We'll just fight one-on-one, and whoever actually kills the other will be ruling the whole thing. And they accepted that. And while they were in the duel, then Aryat had Abraha on his nose, and he cut him off. That's why Abraha was known as Abraha al-Ashram. Al-Ashram means the one whose nose is cut. So he was known for that. But Abraha was able to trick him. That he said that the story said that he had somebody who was helping him from behind, and he was able to kill actually Aryat. And he became the big leader, the ultimate leader, of course, of the Abyssinian army. Meanwhile, the Najashi heard of what happened, and he got very upset that I sent you to spread ruling and justice, and then you fight with one another. So he decided, he sent a letter to Abraha telling him that I'm coming there to Yemen. I will not leave. I will not come back until I set my feet on the soil of Yemen, and until I set my feet on your head. So Abraha got very scared, because the king of Abyssinia could do that. So what Abraha did, he sent him back a message. He told him that, listen, what happened actually, we did it. I had to do it to spare any division in the army. I had no choice. And here, just to fulfill your vow and your swearing, I'm sending you a bag of the soil of Yemen so you can step on it. And I shaved my head, and here's my hair so you can step on my hair. Giving a fatwa, like some people do, you know. That here. So the king of Abyssinia felt comfortable with that, of course, and then he did not continue his journey toward Yemen. But Abraha was still concerned, was still actually scared that, you know, I want to please him even beyond that. That's when he decided to build a huge church called Al-Qulais. He says a church that has nothing like it. Something that is immense and extravagant and huge. And he told them that with this church, I will divert the people away even from the Kaaba in Mecca. Something that will be tremendously big. And of course, some of the Arabs heard of that. And by the way, sometimes we talk about the Arabs and the Jahiliyyah. Some people say that those are the worst of the people. That's not true. The Arabs and the Jahiliyyah had some great qualities. That's why the message came among them, by the way. They had the generosity, the courage, all of these great values that were an asset actually to Islam. That's what the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I was sent to complete the good morals. So the good morals, some of them were already existent. So they were not all that bad. That's why one of the Arabs actually heard of what Abraha is planning to do. What? Divert people away from the Kaaba. How could you do that? So he decided to go sneak into the church of Al-Qulais, and he used it as a bathroom in the middle of the church. Abraha found out, and he got so upset, and he swore that he would destroy the Kaaba himself. So he prepared a big, huge army, led by some elephants. One big elephant in the front, named Mahmud. Anybody's Mahmud in here? Of course, a beautiful name, of course, So an army led by elephants, in the front of which was Mahmud. And the leader of Quraysh at that time was Abdul Muttalib. Who was Abdul Muttalib? The grandfather of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. He was the big chief of Quraysh. So here's that army marching toward Mecca. And everybody's hearing about it. And many tribes, by the way, tried to stop it, but they could not. And many of them even were killed in the process, trying to defend actually the Kaaba. Until the army reached on the outskirts of Mecca. And the elephant stopped. They would push him forward, he wouldn't go. They would push him right, he would. Left, he would move. Backward, he would move. But forward, he would not move. And he stopped them there. So Abraha decided to negotiate with Abdul Muttalib. On their way, before they get to Mecca, they met a flock or a herd of camels that belonged to Abdul Muttalib. And they captured 100 camels. So here Abraha invited Abdul Muttalib to visit and negotiate with him. And Abdul Muttalib used to be a charismatic person, very handsome and very strong presence. So when Abraha saw him, he was impressed by him. So he made him sit next to him. And he asked him, what do you want? And Abdul Muttalib told him, I want my camels. I want my camels. So Abraha got really shocked. He said, you asked for the camels. And you forget about the Kaaba, which is the honor of your grandfathers. And Abdul Muttalib, of course, made the famous statement. He said, أَنَا رَبُّ الْإِبْلِ وَلِلْبَيْتِ رَبٌّ يَحْمِيهِ. I am the Lord of the camels, and the house has its Lord has its own Lord that will take care of it. So he gave him his camels. He gave him his camels, and Abdul Muttalib then asked the people to move out of Quraysh. So no harm will happen to them. And the army, of course, marched forward toward Mecca, and that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the birds. Surah Al-Fil. طَيْرًا أَبَابِيلَ تَرْمِيهِمْ بِحِجَارَةٍ مِّن سِجِّيلٍ فَجَعَلَهُمْ كَعَصْفٍ مَأْكُولٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent some birds with stones, one in the beak and one at each of the feet. And each time a stone hits somebody, he starts falling down, he says, until they all die. Even Abraha himself, he said, died, and he died on his way back home. And all of the whole army actually was destroyed as such. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with that, he spared his great house, Al-Kaaba. And that very year, of course, a great event happened. What happened in that year? The Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam was born. In that great year. That's why this was a great event. And by the way, that's how they used to date in the early days. They would date, doesn't mean they get together. Date means like having a dating system, a year. They would date by the main event that happened in that year. So the Prophet was born in the year of the elephant. There's, for example, something that happened in the year of the famine, or Ta'un Amwas, the year of the plague. They would look at the significant event that happened in that year, and they will date by that, of course, which was not an accurate system until the whole system of the year and the Hijrah, the system of dating by the Hijrah, was started in the Khilafah of Umar alayhi ridwanillah. But with that, the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam was born on that year. And of course his father was Abdullah, his mother was Amina. Abdullah, his father, died before the Prophet was born. When the mother was 6 months pregnant. He was on his way from Mecca to Medina, and he died in there. And his mother Amina was from Medina. Amina was from Medina. And then his father was, of course, one of the children of Abdul Muttalib, the chief of Mecca. So the Prophet ﷺ was born on that year. How did he grow up? And when did he receive the revelation? Inshallah, we'll get into that next time. Make sure you'll be there. Any question or comment, inshallah? Nope. Allah, it is good, subhanAllah, try to visualize some of these events that happen as to how things actually were, the situation were. Of course, by that time, people were already worshipping the idols. And the person that introduced the idol worshipping was a person was Amr ibn Luhay al-Khuza'i. What happened, which happened before Abdul Muttalib, by the way, a little before Abdul Muttalib, what happened is that he was visiting actually Bilad al-Sham, the area of the Levant, and he stopped by a tribe called al-Amaliq. And he found them actually worshipping some idols, and he liked the idea. And they told him that, no, we're worshipping these idols to bring us closer to God. So we are worshipping God. And subhanAllah, that's how deviations start. That with a small step in the wrong direction until eventually it gets really bad. So he brought 2 of these idols back to Mecca. And of course, every time a person needs something, then he started his own idol until they had actually an idol for almost every day. And they started worshipping Allah through the idols until eventually they started worshipping the idols themselves. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ said that I saw this Amr ibn al-Hayy al-Khuza'i dragging his intestines in hellfire. Because he's the one that introduced actually the idol worshipping into actually Quraysh after it was following the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Okay? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
When they communicated, like different tribes, they had translators, right?
What do you mean complicated?
Say, you have some
Yeah, they had translators, but of course Arabic actually was the dominant language in that time, which started, like I said, with the migration of the tribe of Jurhum from Yemen. That's why all of Arabia was speaking Arabic at that time. It was the language. It was the language of the Arabian Peninsula at that time, and also much of the area even beyond. This is what's called al-Arab al-Musta'riba, the Arabized Arab, so to speak, versus al-Arab al-Ariba, which are the ones that came actually from Yemen. خير إن شاء الله. جزاكم الله خير والحمد لله رب العالمين.